Hello, everyone, and welcome to Big Rock Moto. Thank you so much for tuning in today. Now, many of you are going to be familiar with Ari Henning. Ari is a longtime motorcycle journalist, and he currently works for Revzilla as the host of the Shop Manual and CTXP, or Common Tread XP. So Ari Henning, like many of us, he wanted a low-maintenance, reliable dual sport motorcycle, but something that had a pretty high level of performance. So what Ari has done, he's built up this bike that you're seeing right here. This is a Honda CRF300L, but it has extensive customizations and upgrades, including Ari's own big bore kit and a lot of other cool upgrades, including an all-new suspension system. Ari's big bore kit takes this bike from a relatively anemic stock 23 horsepower all the way up to 32 horsepower, which I want to note is within striking distance of what a stock KTM 350 EXC makes. So today we'll meet up with Ari Henning at his shop in Los Angeles. We'll go over in detail all the things he did to make this the best CRF300L pretty much ever made. I'll take this out on my local highways and trails to really see what the capability of this customized bike is. We'll talk about some comparisons because I know a lot of you are wondering, should you just get a CRF450L or a KTM or something else, and then we'll end out with some final thoughts. So let's go for a ride. Exactly. So Ari, we're in your garage, we're in your shop. Thank you for having me down here. I really appreciate it.
Sure.
And why don't you kind of talk us through what you've done to this super cool Honda 300?
Yeah, so this is my personal 300L. I finally built one for myself after doing a lot of work for customers. I supply the big bore kit that's in the engine. And that's kind of the genesis of this whole thing. And that dates back to 2013 when I was racing a CBR 250 and started developing engine parts for that. So I have a lot of experience with this engine platform, literally since the beginning, since 2011 when Honda came out with the 250. But this particular bike, engine-wise, has my 301cc big bore kit in it. So it's a 11.5 to 1 compression ratio instead of the stock 10.7.1. And we're getting about 32 horsepower out of the motor, and that's up from a stock 23 to 24. So, I mean, it's close to 35% increase in power. And there's lots of these out there, so it's very reliable. And it's not just the piston, it's also got CBR cams in it, which is a popular mod. It's obviously got a full Yoshimura exhaust. It's got the CBR 300 velocity stack and a high flow filter, and then a vented airbox and a fuel map. But I mean, other than that, that's the entire performance package. And that gets you from, like I said, 23 to 24 horsepower to about 32, and torque is up around 22 foot-pounds. So really brings the bike to life, allows it to trot down the highway easily, 70, 80 miles an hour, not an issue. Off-road, a lot more fun. I mean, bringing the front wheel up in second gear is not a problem. And it just turns this motorcycle into what I wanted it to be and what I think a lot of other people had hoped it could be, which is a approachable, friendly, capable dual sport, light enduro, small ADV. I mean, the stock tank is basically too small if you're trying to do any sort of BDR or touring stuff. So this is the large capacity Acerbis. Some people say Acerbis, some people say Acerbis.
I say Acerbis, I don't know.
Yeah. So the large Acerbis tank, it's 3.7 gallons. And even with the big bore kit, you're still getting, 50 to 60 miles per gallon on road. Off road, your results may vary. The seat concept's seat, because the stocker just isn't that great on the highway, kind of torches your buttons. And now that this thing will actually cruise 75, 80, it's nice to have somewhere that's comfortable to sit. Let's see, what else? Also did the frame covers, just because the painted steel frame, your dirty boots will wear the paint off and then it starts rusting. And then the simple bash guard. And I went for lightweight stuff. Like, I know you can get an aluminum bash plate. I know you can get a radiator guard, but I'm not going to be doing hard enduro on this bike. So I don't necessarily feel like it needs to have super robust crash protection. And I really wanted to keep the weight down as much as possible. Same reason I did the tri-fit handguards. Like, they're plastic. They're the same thing I have in my 300 XCW, and I've crashed the crap out of that thing and they've never broke. So I didn't want to do the full aluminum wraparounds and add that weight and that bulk. Love the double take mirrors. Yep. I went with the smaller ones. Again, I don't think that's something Revzilla sells, but I'm not restricted to that sort of thing. These are the, what is the name of the brand?
Oh, I've seen these before.
What's the name of the brand? It's not Rizoma. I put them on, we built a custom bike for Cycle Gear for the 50th anniversary, and these things are so wicked bright. And I basically, the stock turn signal has like this mount here, and I cut it off and ground it flat and then machined a hole into this so that these can run. and they're just like super bright.
Whoa.
And I left them fast. I didn't want to put a resistor in there because I like them fast.
I agree.
Yeah, and then in the back I did the 12 o'clock Labs integrated taillight, which is super clean. It just like
it looks great.
Gets rid of everything. It's integrated, so it and you can program it to do a bunch of different stuff.
Yeah,
Again,
so you don't have these to stick out the brake.
Exactly. And with the camel rack, you can maintain the stock stems here for the straps, which I did. They also have bolts just like that, but I like being able to strap things over. And now it can take rear luggage rack. Like I know when I was emailing with you, you were asking if I had a rack. The Motoz Tractionator RALs recommended by you, Ian. So those are on there, and so far so good. They
yeah, that's a good tire for this bike.
Yeah, it does, and they work really well on pavement as well. It's not like you're compromising a whole lot.
They're gonna last probably 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 miles.
That's awesome.
Well, maybe.
Yeah, it depends how you ride it.
Yeah.
I know I definitely wasn't clutching up as many wheelies once I put these on because I was like, the stock tires, I didn't care. I was like backing it into corners and spinning tire, and it was like, sure, roach those things. It's got the full K-Tech suspension. So I did the 20 IDS cartridge kit on the fork, and then I did the Razor light shock in the back. So that has a spring rate that's for my weight, and then it has adjustable rebound. The K-Tech cartridge kit, I know a lot of people like the Rally Raid setup because it drops right in. This one, you do have to modify the left leg, I think it is. Correct. The left leg originally, I believe, is just spring, and the right leg is the damping. It might be reversed. Forgive me if I'm speaking out of turn. This puts a cartridge in each leg and a spring in each leg. So it has isolated rebound, isolated compression. It's a proper suspension system. You do have to fully disassemble one leg and spin the fork bottom off, which, like, if you've got the right tools, it's not that big a deal, but it's kind of intimidating if you've never done it before. But I'm really happy with the fork at this point. It's got preload, it's got compression, it's got rebound adjustment. And that's really good. And I know some people like to upgrade the brakes. I haven't yet because I just don't feel like it's necessary. And that's kind of been my approach with this bike is I'm not just like going through a catalog and ordering and buying stuff. I'm kind of upgrading as I see fit and as I see necessary. So as it stands, I'm real happy with it. It's comfortable, it's fun, it's very quick and responsive, and it's exactly what I wanted the 300L to be.
So can you talk about like why would someone choose this versus like just buying a higher performance bike to begin with?
Yeah, I mean, I came up in the small displacement road racing world, racing CBRs and RC390s and R3s, and people are always like, why don't you just get an R6? Why don't you just get a CBR 600? And it is ultimately cheaper to go with a smaller bike. You know, entry point on one of these is say $5,000, and then yes, you do have to throw several $1,000s in it to make the engine what you want and suspension what you want. But then you're still below the price point of a bigger, faster bike that you still need to modify. You can get a 450L for whatever they are, $11,000, $12,000, but you're still going to need to get the suspension resprung and revalved. You're still going to need to get it mapped. You're still going to want to put a pipe on it. You're still going to need crash protection. So it is a lower price point. Ultimately, you are getting less performance, but in my mind, most people can't utilize the performance of a 450 or a 350 or a 500. And those high-strung engines are just, they're not very approachable, they're not very friendly, and they're super high maintenance. Like, you know, Honda says you can go 8,000 miles on an oil change, which I think is insane. I would never recommend that. It's 1.8 quarts. Like, why not replace it every 3,000 miles? That's what I do. But still, the service intervals are wild. I mean, valve clearances is thousands of miles. So it's something that you can ride cross country. It's something you can do all summer riding and not have to spend a bunch of downtime doing maintenance. And it's approachable. Like, it's such an approachable bike to begin with. And once you do these mods and actually get the suspension working well and give it the power to have some capability and some performance, you've still got the core fundamentals of a motorcycle that is very friendly, very user-friendly, easy to ride, and enjoyable to ride. Yeah, I sell the Big War piston kit. I do ported heads. I do valve jobs. I do complete engine builds. I've got an engine over there on the bench that I'm going to be sending to a guy in Tennessee, and I've got a bunch of kits here that I'm prepping for shipping. But I've got a website now. It's not very creative name. It is CRF300LBigBore.com. Pretty straightforward. Was going for the old SEO there. But yeah, with the website, we've got all the products. We've actually even got this bike that you can ride. You can rent it through Twisted Road and sample it before you buy, because some people are curious about it, or some people are just visiting California and want to ride a dual sport. So we have a lot of options there. We've got the little text to chat thing, which goes directly to my phone. I do, in fact, answer all of those directly. But yeah, that's trying to turn it into a bit more of a business. So the cylinders I have machined locally in Corona. It's an OEM Honda cylinder that we have bored out to 78 millimeters to 2.5 thousandths of an inch clearance. The machinist I use is excellent, but I still double check everything on the micrometer and the bore gauge. So these actually get double quality control checked for clearance. I set ring end gap on every kit that goes out. They're all machined with a serial number. So 3495 that matches 3495. So they are all matched sets. A lot of times when you buy a big bore kit from a mass producer, they're getting a box of pistons, they're getting a box of cylinders, they're just pulling them out and matching them together. These are all matched married couples. We provide it with upgraded stud nuts because the stock ones are known to strip. So I do class 10 JIS nuts. I have custom gaskets made in America by Comedic. Our piston rings are all coming from Japan. So it's all stuff that's like, this isn't fly by night. I've been doing this for a long time and I built a lot of kits. And ultimately what I did was I built it for myself to win races. So that's where the impetus is. That's where the motivation for quality came from. I wasn't just like, oh, I want to sell a product. Like these are all from race bikes that I've had. That's my little altar to the gods of speed. And I was pretty successful. I won 4 local championships, set a bunch of lap records. So the parts speak for themselves. And then moving on to the CRF, it's such a cool way to be part of people's adventures, to be able to know when my customers are texting me pictures from a 12,000 foot pass in Colorado, and they're like, bike run's great, man. This is so much fun. I get to live vicariously through that. And it's really satisfying to know that I'm helping facilitate people having rad motorcycle adventures.
Is there anything else on here that you would want to, any other parts you'd want to upgrade, or is this pretty much like everything you would ever want to do to it?
That's a good question. I didn't mention the handlebar. I put an 1 1/8" handlebar on it just because I don't like the stock steel ones. And it does have a couple parts on it that I'm kind of prototyping. It's got a TrailTech thermostat with the integrated radiator hose pickup. And that was because I was doing so much dyno testing. I just want to be able to monitor water jacket temp. I also have a quick disconnect on the fuel tank because I've had the cylinder head off of this about 5 times and done myriad cam swaps. So the stock Honda fuel connector is incredibly finicky and delicate. So I have a quick disconnect under the tank so it pops off really easily. So I might start selling that. I might start selling a kit for the thermostat because I've seen people, they like zip tie it up here or they put it somewhere awkward. And I made like a little bracket that I'll probably have laser cut and bent and start offering that as well. But as far as stuff I want to do, I'm kind of tempted to see what a recluse clutch would feel like in this, but that's a lot of money to throw at the clutch. Yeah. I don't have any problem with the slip assist clutch. I know some people like to swap it out for a conventional, but I've had no issues with it. Probably put some luggage on it, honestly, just to give it some overnight capability. I love bike packing. And so moto camping is a lot of fun too. Great question. Yeah. So stock gearing went out the window. I know a lot of people are actually gearing down on a stock bike because they need more power. I was able to gear up because the engine is making power. So it's got a 15 tooth on the front. So I actually just did the calculation this morning. 8.3% is what I had to adjust the speedometer for. And I could even throw a 38 on the rear down from a 40 if I was going to do ADV style stuff and stay on the road. And that way you could cruise 80 at like 7,000 RPM. Right. Whereas now it's pretty much like if you're going 70, it's turning like 6,800 RPM. Whereas before, going 70 on a stock bike is, you better hope you have a tailwind.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I geared this up because it's making enough power that it can very readily go faster. And I've been thinking about experimenting with the transmission itself with some of the 250 and CBR 300 ratios, because I'd really like to make 6th and overdrive. It's a pretty close ratio box in this engine.
Yeah.
A key mod on this bike is the velocity stack mod. This is the stock velocity stack. So this goes onto the throttle body, and this phallic looking thing hangs all the way into the airbox. Absolutely chokes the engine above 7,000 RPM. Okay. For a long time, the mod has been the CBR 300 velocity stack, which is obviously a lot shorter and bigger diameter. And when you get a shorter, what they call it a primary tube. Anything air filter side the engine, funneling air in is called the primary tube. So the longer primary tube typically is better for.
It's trash day.
It is trash day. I'm just trained to pause when there's a noise because otherwise my director's like, hey, be quiet. So a long primary tube is typically good for torque, but it's not good for high RPM. A shorter primary tube is good for high RPM, but not torque. Like modern sport bikes actually have adjustable length velocity stacks. So people run this one, but it's a pain in the butt to install. You have to modify the airbox. You have to jam this thing on. So my partner at 550 Performance, who is a lot smarter than I am, prints these bad boys. So it's the no-cut velocity stack. It eliminates the little, people call it the tumor. It's the resonator box that sits on the side here for noise. And so this thing drops right in. But this is a crucial part of the ecosystem of the engine because you're putting a bigger piston in it, you have more displacement, but it needs to be able to breathe air efficiently. And that has to do with the air filter, the velocity stack, and the exhaust. So this is a key part of it. A high flow air filter is part of it. And then obviously putting a good performance exhaust system on it.
All right, let's see how powerful this little bike is. Let's do some 0 to 60 runs, and then we'll test the acceleration and the braking. Wow, this bike is pretty quick actually. Let's do it. So that was slightly downhill. Let's go slightly uphill. Let's go slightly uphill this time. You know what? This thing has enough power to be fun. This is a complete transformation from a stock CRF300L. Like, not even the same universe. It feels like a totally different motorcycle. And I would say the same thing versus a KLX 300, right? This thing is so much quicker than those. I actually have to fight to keep the front end down in the first, like, 2 or 3 gears. Now, for the brakes, I will say, and this is not a criticism of Ari Henning's build, but the factory brakes on this bike are pretty soft. But again, this is not like a race bike or a street bike or a supermoto bike, so I don't think that really matters. They have really nice, soft, progressive feel, which is good if you want to ride off-road. On the street, they're a bit soft, but that's more a review of the stock bike, really. What I really appreciate is the power is very linear. It revs out very freely all the way to redline. The transmission shifts buttery smooth, really crisp. The clutch has a light pull. It's very easy to ride, and it's really fun to rip this thing around. There's 70. The way this bike gets up to highway speed is really impressive. You also have to consider that I'm at elevation. I'm testing this bike between 4,000 and 6,000 feet above sea level. The roll-on power here in 5th gear. You really do have to be willing to rev this engine out a bit to get the power out of it. And if you're willing to do that, this thing will rip up to 70 or 80 with no issues. So how is it, and the speedometer is accurate, by the way, so cruising at 65, 70 miles an hour, it's very comfortable, no vibration at all through the bike, which is phenomenal for a dual sport bike, because my KTM is, you know, a paint shaker for sure. Yeah, this is a very, very, for a dual sport bike, this is really, really good on the highway. Yeah, if you run it in 6th gear going up a hill, like you're going to have to downshift, you know, 20 foot-pounds of torque or whatever it has, 21, 22, with the big bore kit, it's still not a lot. .75 is 7,000 RPM. 7,000 RPM at 75. I'm impressed by that. This bike will hold 75 miles an hour up a hill at high elevation. very, very good. And there's really very little vibration until you get around 8,000 RPM. I'm very impressed with this bike's highway capabilities for a dual sport bike. It's excellent. All right, put it on the little enduro track here. You know, this kind of super gnarly, rocky hill climb thing is probably the upper level of what most people are going to do if they have a CRF300L, even a modified one. So, I mean, you know, if you do something more than this, then that's great, more power to you. And I'm not pretending I'm some expert rider, but let's test it out and see how she goes. Ho 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 ho! Woo! Woo! Very fun, very good, very, very good. Very easy to ride. All right, now, probably what most people do with their dual sports, just doing, you know, 2 tracks and fire roads and things like this. Let's see how she goes. It really has a surprising amount of power. I'm in 3rd gear. Whew! She really rips. Dang. Handles great. Camera's going all sorts of places. Woohoo! You downshift a second, boy, this thing can really rock it off. You! Send it! 60 miles an hour, baby! Whoa, okay. You! Oh my gosh, this bike is so legit. Like, I was expecting to be kind of underwhelmed compared to my KTM, but I'm honestly not. Like, this thing is the real package, man. This thing is fantastic. And the fact that you can do all this and still go on the highway, and you have a Honda with low maintenance, oh my gosh, I'm sold. This thing is fantastic. You know, it doesn't have a ton of torque. You kind of have to rev the motor, but it's okay. It's so much fun. The suspension is really good. Man, this thing is impressive. I am just genuinely impressed with this bike, and it is an authentically fun, almost thrilling experience to ride, which is surprising for a CRF300. Check. All right, I'm here on my Singletrack Test course, and we'll ride this big bore CR300L and see how she is on a low speed kind of technical single track. Now, this bike is obviously, no one is buying this, a CRF300L, to do like extreme enduro riding. Where do my gloves go? It's always the gloves, you know? No one's buying this bike to do extreme enduro type riding, but you might want to do some single track, maybe moderately challenging. And the whole idea with a motorcycle like this, especially if you spend money to do all these mods, is you want to be able to use it for a lot of different types of off-road riding. So, let's see how she goes. Now, I will point out that Ari has some pretty tall gearing on here. This bike has a 75 mile an hour cruise, so it's not really set up for low speed, but we'll do our best, and actually, I think it's going to be okay. Yep, the gearing's pretty tall. The gearing's pretty tall, but that's okay. We can just leave it in first gear. Position of standing is actually very nice with the risers that Ari has on here. Trying to go really slow, pick my way through these rocks. My initial impressions are it's extremely smooth. It's nothing like the bucking Bronco, the unrideable CRF300L. It's nothing like that. It's gentle, linear power delivery, super easy. What I like, the soft clutch pull, while it's kind of weird at first when you get on the bike, is kind of nice on single track because your hand doesn't get tired from pulling the clutch. I really love riding on this trail. It's just a lot of fun. We get into some kind of rocks up here. It's pretty fun to navigate ourselves through the rocks. And although Ari did tell me to really send it, rocks there. Boy, very, very good low speed control. Yep, there's the tall gearing coming into play. Tight rocks. Actually very, very good. Very good. I think in a lot of ways this is easier to ride out here than my KTM 350. Just because it's a bit smoother, a bit lower to the ground, and it just has a nice gentle amount of power. Man, these ergos are really dialed too. Boulder section here. Ha 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 ha. Very tight corners. This bike is great. I have to say, I was not expecting it to be this good for single track, but it is superb. It's very, very good. Even with these adventure type tires on here. We've got some foot peg scrapers here. Try to avoid that. All right, here's some post-test notes that I have about the bike. This seat concept seat, oh my gosh, for a dual sport seat, this thing is unbelievably comfortable, wide, supportive. Also looks great on here. This is so much better than the seat concepts that I have on my own personal KTM. The Yoshi pipe, it's still, even with this insert in here for the spark rester, it's still a little bit loud for my taste. It's acceptable, but you probably want to wear earplugs. I've seen worse, I've heard worse, but it's a lot louder than stock, and you need to consider that. I mean, the only way to really get this engine flowing with everything that's been done is to have some sort of aftermarket pipe, and you do increase the volume levels with that. The Rousey tires, I think, are a nice compromise between on-road and off-road. I think that's a great choice, and actually I recommended those to Ari when he was building this bike. The controls felt really good. I was able to get to my brake lever. The pegs felt pretty good. I wish the pegs were a tiny bit bigger, but I think it was okay. I'd like to see some header protection here on the exhaust header. I don't know if you can get that because this is not a factory pipe, but something to cover this to kind of protect that from getting burned on your pant or rubbing against brush or things like that. The suspension, if this was my own bike, I would be spending some time tuning in the clickers and the preload and the spring rates for me, although it actually felt pretty impressive, right, the way Ari has it set up. But I felt a little harshness maybe in the front, maybe something with the clicker settings. I would just need to dial that in. I like these lightweight handguards that he's chosen. There's a lot of small details on here that I just really appreciate. This rear rack is actually really nice. It doesn't like stick out to the side. I think that was a nice choice. Ari, he does some really, oops, license plate's a little cracked there. He made some really nice component choices here. I like this large gas tank and the fact that it locks. That was really cool. Talked about how the clutch feels really light. The mirrors vibrate a little bit. I would go to the adventure style mirror as opposed to the enduro style. That's personal preference. These work okay though. They're fine. I like the temperature gauge that he's got here by Trail Tech. That was great. It's also really nice having a tachometer. So you've got a fuel gauge, a clock, a tachometer, big speedometer, trip computers, miles per gallon, gear indicator. That's fantastic because the dual sport bike that I have, my KTM, doesn't have any of that. What about versus a CRF450RL? Are you better off just buying the 450 versus going with a 300 and then spending a bunch of time and money and doing an upgrade? Here's how it basically breaks down. The 300 is smoother and easier to ride. It has better throttle response, less vibration. It's more accessible. It's better for shorter riders, better for intermediate skill riders. It's better on the highway than the 450, and it has lower maintenance intervals. On the other hand, the 450 is set up more for aggressive off-roading. It's got longer travel suspension, pretty good suspension right out of the box, although you're still going to need to get springs for your weight and spend some money there. The main drawback of the 450 is the incredibly bad throttle response, stalling, flaming out, the fueling is terrible on the 450, probably the worst of any motorcycle I've tested. Now you end up doing an ECU or programming and exhaust system to the 450, you're getting into $500, $1,000, $2,000 depending on what you do there. So you're dumping money into the 450 as well. If you make all that effort, spend the time and money on the 450, although it's less time and money than you would doing these mods here, you can get the 450 to be a pretty sweet bike, but you still have a taller seat height, more vibration, more maintenance, and probably more cost, definitely more cost if you really add all that up apples to apples. So at the end of the day, it's not really like there's a clear winner. It just depends on sort of what you're looking for. I thought it made sense to pull out my KTM 350. I have a 2024 KTM 350 EXCF, street legal dual sport from KTM with quite a bit of modifications on it. And I thought, this is kind of interesting to compare it to because actually the modified 300 kind of reminds me power-wise of the KTM 350. So what are the differences that I see? So the KTM is around $12,000 stock, and then I've added about, it's hard to say, maybe $3,000 worth of extra stuff between crash protection, upgraded wheel set, ECU, and an end cap, a custom seat, the Moscow luggage, the fuel tank, different control setups, the steering stabilizer. I probably added more like $4,000 or $5,000 worth of stuff here on this bike. The 300L, you can buy one for, I think they're around $6,000. And then all the modifications on this one total around $5,500. So that's about $11,500 all said and done for that. This bike is probably around $15,000 or $16,000. And I know that, the modifications to that are much more extensive with the big bore and all the engine changes and the airbox changes and the cams. And my motor is stock except for an upgraded end cap on the exhaust. This is $150, I think. And I have the Get ECU from Takamoto, which is around $1,000. So for around $1,000, I went from 36 horsepower stock, I think, up to about 45 horsepower on my bike now. That bike went from 23 up to 32. So I still have a lot more power on the 350, obviously. The next difference is the weight. So my KTM weighs about 250 pounds in stock form. This weighs about 310 pounds, I believe, in stock form. So 50 to 60 pounds heavier, heavier frame, but you do have more luggage carrying capacity. You have the Honda durability. It's better on the highway. KTM is more set up for enduro riding. Some other differences I noticed, the KTM's a lot taller, so getting on the Honda is much nicer. It's nicer seat height. Also, the seat on the Honda is much, much better. The engine vibration, although the 350 has less vibration than the 500 or 501, this Honda is still much smoother than my personal bike, like dramatically smoother. On the highway, the Honda comfortably cruises at 75, whereas my bike can only cruise about 55 miles an hour, but a lot of that's due to the gearing because I have gearing set up for single track. In terms of maintenance, that's where a big difference is. So on my bike, I have to change the oil every couple of rides, and on the Honda, you can go much, much further because it's more of a street bike engine with those longer maintenance intervals and it holds more oil. Things like valve adjustments is going to be few and far between on the Honda, whereas a KTM, you're doing that kind of stuff fairly often. Although I found if you maintain these, these will give you some good service life, but nothing like the Honda motor will. The suspension, The upgraded suspension that Ari has put on that Honda is actually very good. It's still not as good as the WP Exact that comes on the KTM. I have a stock suspension, stock springs, and it run 200 pounds. I'm overloading the stock springs a little bit on my KTM, but it's actually not too bad. The stock suspension on these new 2024s is much better than the previous generation. There's a lot of other differences, and they're very different bikes. I think for most people can't use, most people, including myself, by the way, cannot use the capability of these KTMs. We're only just barely getting into their capability with the riding that we do. And the Honda's probably better suited for the dual sport riding than most of us are doing. For super hard enduro riding or extreme level enduro, sure, you're gonna want a full-on enduro bike like this. But most people who have these bikes, they're not doing that at all. They're not doing that. And the Honda's better. You know, it's better on the highway. It's a good fire road bike. It does good just about everywhere. It's easier to ride. You're gonna have less maintenance. But again, you've got all that custom work that goes into that versus this is a bit easier. You can just buy one of these, do a few mods to it that bolt on, and then you're good to go, although you will spend more money going this route. All right, I hope you've enjoyed the video today. Please check out Ari Henning's website, CRF300LBigBore.com. Ari does not only the engine work and offers the upgrade kits, but he can also build a custom bike just like this if that's something that you might be interested in. So get in touch with Ari. He's a fabulous guy, super nice, super humble, super friendly, and one of the best people in the motorcycle industry as far as I'm concerned. So it's been a real pleasure working with him on this video project. It's been a real pleasure riding this bike. This bike is legit. It is fantastic. I would love to have this bike in my garage. And really, if I didn't have my KTM all set up right now, I'd probably have Ari build me one of these because this thing is great and has some really significant advantages, not only over a stock CRF300L, but over a lot of other competition out there. So please support the channel. There's ways to do that down below. You can bookmark my link tree for when you're shopping for your parts and gear. Thank you so much for watching. Ride safe, and I'll see you out there.